When was the last time you went to a Denny's at 3 a.m.? Maybe after a concert, maybe after a long shift, maybe just because you could. For decades, Denny's was the place that was always open, always there. The grand slam at any hour. But that era is ending. Between 2024 and 2025, Denny's is closing between 150 to 180 restaurants. That's 10% of their entire system. And a huge chunk of those closures? California. Now, the company will tell you this is just portfolio optimization. They'll say it's about underperforming units and strategic realignment, and that's partly true. But there's a darker story underneath those corporate buzzwords. A story about crime so bad that a Denny's in Oakland that survived for 54 years finally had to close its doors. A story about downtown areas that look like ghost towns, even though the pandemic ended years ago. A story about private security guards that cost more per month than most people's salaries. Today, we're going to break down the real reasons Denny's is abandoning California's cities, and it comes down to three major factors: the collapse of the 24-hour business model due to crime, the geographic death of downtowns, and a regulatory environment that's making it impossible for legacy businesses to survive. Before we dive in, if you want to understand what's really happening to American businesses and supply chains, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Do you feel safe going to a 24-hour restaurant in your city anymore? I want to hear your experiences. Let me start with the numbers, because this isn't just a few random closures. In 2024, Denny's shut down 88 locations. The company announced this during their October 2024 Investor Day, where they identified 265 of their worst-performing restaurants for assessment. The plan is to close about 60% of those units and try to rehabilitate the rest with renovations. These aren't new restaurants that failed. These are legacy stores that have been open for an average of 30 years, 3 decades. These locations survived recessions, competition, changing food trends, but they can't survive what's happening right now. The financial profile of these closing locations tells you everything. They're pulling in about $1.1 million in annual revenue, which sounds like a lot until you realize the system-wide target is $2.2 million. They're generating less than $25,000 in annual EBITDA. That's earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. For a full-service restaurant operating 24/7, that's basically break-even or worse. You can't run a business on those margins. You can't invest in your property. You can't weather unexpected costs. You can't do anything except survive month to month. And then in late 2025, Denny's was acquired for $620 million by a private equity group including Triartisan Capital Advisors and Yadav Enterprises, which is actually one of Denny's largest franchisees. When private equity comes in, they're focused on one thing: efficiency. Cut the dead weight, optimize cash flow, make the remaining units profitable. That's accelerated these closures. It's not personal. It's just math. But here's where the corporate strategy meets cold reality. Because while Denny's is closing underperforming stores nationwide, the California closures are different. They're not just about low sales, they're about survival. They're about whether it's even possible to operate a 24-hour diner in an urban California market anymore. Let me tell you about the Denny's on Hegenberger Road in Oakland. This location opened in 1970, 54 years. It served travelers going to Oakland International Airport. It served locals. It survived everything: oil crises, recessions, competition from every chain you can name. And in 2024, it closed permanently. The official statement said the decision was made for the safety and well-being of Denny's team members and guests. That's corporate speak for "it's too dangerous to operate here anymore." Hegenberger Road has become a case study in urban collapse. This is a corridor near a major airport, prime real estate for hospitality businesses. And yet, business after business has fled. In 2024, a profitable In-N-Out Burger location on Hegenberger closed. In-N-Out doesn't close profitable locations. They're a privately held company that prints money. But they shut it down because of rampant crime, armed robberies, Constant car break-ins targeting tourists who don't know any better. Customers scared to eat there. Employees scared to work there. Think about what it means when a Denny's that operated for 54 years says, "We can't do this anymore." That's not a business failure. That's a societal failure. And it's not unique to Oakland. The 24-hour business model, the thing that made Denny's iconic, has become a liability. Because the hours between midnight and 6 a.m. are when these restaurants are most vulnerable. Low customer traffic, small staff, cash on premises. You're essentially an open target. And in California's urban areas, businesses are responding by hiring private security. Let me show you what that costs. In Los Angeles and Orange County, an unarmed security guard costs between $30 and $37 per hour. If you need 24/7 coverage, that's roughly $21,000 to $26,000 per month, over $300,000 per year for unarmed security. If you need armed security because the situation is that bad, you're looking at $50 to $95 per hour. That translates to $36,000 to $68,000 per month. At the high end, you're spending over $800,000 per year on security alone. Now remember, these struggling Denny's locations are generating less than $25,000 in annual EBITDA. How do you pay for security that costs 10 to 30 times your annual profit? You can't. It's mathematically impossible. So you do what businesses across California are doing. You cut your hours. You stop being open 24 hours. You close at 10 p.m. or midnight. And once you do that, you're no longer really Denny's. You've lost your brand identity. You've lost the competitive advantage that made you special. A 2025 survey found that 36% of Los Angeles restaurants were reducing their hours of operation to manage costs and mitigate safety risks. That's not a supply chain problem. That's not a labor problem. That's a crime problem that's making the basic business model of late-night dining untenable. But crime is only part of the story. The second major factor killing these Denny's locations is something called the donut effect. And if you live in a major California city, you've seen this happening in real time. The pandemic normalized remote work and hybrid work. Even now, years after COVID, millions of people are not going back to downtown offices 5 days a week. And when office workers don't come downtown, the entire economic ecosystem that depended on them collapses. Denny's locations in downtown areas relied on a predictable pattern: breakfast before work, lunch during work, late night after bars and entertainment. But if there are no office workers, there's no breakfast rush. If there's no foot traffic, there's no lunch rush. And if downtown feels empty and unsafe, there's no late-night crowd either. The entire revenue model evaporates. Look at the numbers from San Francisco. Union Square, the tourist and shopping heart of the city, foot traffic in 2025 is down 42% compared to 2019. 42%. Chinatown is down 22%. Mission District down 12%. These aren't temporary pandemic effects. This is a structural shift in where people live, work, and spend money. The economic activity has moved to the suburbs, the donut around the empty hole of the downtown core. And it's not just San Francisco. Across major California cities, downtown foot traffic remains dramatically below pre-pandemic levels. Oakland's downtown has a commercial office vacancy rate of 31%. Nearly a third of office space is empty, but commercial rents haven't fallen proportionally. Landlords are slow to drop rents because they're locked into their own financial obligations. Mortgages, property taxes, debt servicing. So you've got this toxic combination. Fewer customers, but rent that's still high. For a Denny's facing a lease renewal in downtown Oakland or downtown LA or downtown San Francisco, the math doesn't work anymore. Tourism hasn't bounced back either, and that's devastating for restaurants. In a typical year, travelers and visitors account for about 30% of sales at U.S. restaurants. In 2025, 47% of restaurant operators reported that their sales from tourism were lower than normal. So if you're a Denny's near a convention center or a tourist area, you're not just missing the office workers, you're missing the tourists too. The donut effect means the future of restaurants is in the suburbs. And Denny's corporate knows this. That's why they acquired Kiki's Breakfast Cafe in 2022 and are now aggressively expanding it. Kiki's is genius from a strategic standpoint. It only operates breakfast and lunch, no late-night hours, no crime risk. It targets a higher-income suburban demographic. It fits perfectly with where consumers actually are now. Denny's is essentially admitting that the old 24-hour urban diner model is dead and building a new brand for the suburban future. Now let's talk about the regulatory and cost pressures that are pushing these struggling locations over the edge. California is an expensive place to operate a restaurant. The labor market is still intensely competitive. 70% of restaurant operators report being understaffed. You have to pay competitive wages to attract workers, and those costs have gone up across the board. Commodity inflation has been brutal. Eggs, a staple for any diner serving breakfast, are up 19.5%. Coffee is up 31.8%. These are core menu items, and when your input costs jump by 20% to 30%, your margins get crushed. You either raise prices and risk losing customers, or you absorb the costs and make no money. But there's another factor that doesn't get talked about enough, and it's particularly insidious: predatory ADA lawsuits. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act and California's Unruh Civil Rights Act, businesses can be sued for accessibility violations. And that's good. We should have accessible buildings, but what's happening in California is that certain law firms have turned this into a business model. They file boilerplate lawsuits against small businesses for minor, often technical violations. Maybe the bathroom grab bar is half an inch too low. Maybe a parking space stripe is slightly off. Things that could be fixed with a simple notice. But instead of sending a letter, they file a lawsuit. And the settlement demands range from $10,000 to $17,000. For a major chain, that's an annoyance. For a franchisee running a low-volume Denny's that makes $25,000 a year in profit, that's a catastrophe. That's almost an entire year's profit gone in a settlement. Some franchisees call it a shakedown. And for a restaurant that's already barely surviving, that unexpected legal expense can be the final straw. It's easier to just close and walk away. Let me pull all of this together because it's important to understand how these factors compound. You start with a legacy, Denny's location in downtown Oakland or LA. It's an older building, 30 years old, needs renovations. Denny's corporate has a Diner 2.0 remodel program that costs about $250,000 per location. If you invest that money, you'll see an average 6.4% sales lift and 6.5% traffic lift. That's a proven ROI. But here's the problem. If your restaurant is only making $25,000 a year in profit, where do you get $250,000 for a remodel? You can't justify that investment. The payback period is 10 years, but your lease expires in 5, so you don't remodel. Meanwhile, foot traffic keeps declining because of remote work. Your revenue drops another 10% year over year. Crime in the area gets worse. You consider hiring security, but that would cost $300,000 a year, and you're barely breaking even. So you cut your hours. You stop being open 24/7. But that drives away the late-night customers who are your most loyal base. Revenue drops more. Then you get hit with an ADA lawsuit, $15,000 settlement. Then your lease comes up for renewal and the landlord wants market rent, which is $8,000 a month when you're currently paying $5,000. You do the math and realize you're going to lose money every single month if you renew. So you call corporate and say, "I'm closing." And corporate looks at your numbers and says, "Yeah, we understand." Because they've got 265 locations in the same situation. This isn't about one bad operator or one bad location. This is systemic. What's Denny's doing about it? They're being smart, honestly. They're not fighting reality. They're accepting that the 24-hour urban diner is dying and they're pivoting. The company's stated goal is to return to net unit growth by 2026. They want to start opening more restaurants than they're closing, and that's achievable if they're strategic about it. Here's what I want you to take away from this. The closure of 150 Denny's restaurants isn't just a corporate restructuring story. It's a symptom of profound dysfunction in California's urban areas. When a business model that worked for 50-plus years suddenly becomes untenable, that's not a failure of the business. That's a failure of public policy. The fact that businesses need to spend more on security than they make in profit tells you everything you need to know about the state of public safety. The classic American diner, open 24 hours, always there, a place where anyone could get a hot meal at any time, is being killed off in California's cities. And it's not being killed by competition or changing tastes. It's being killed by crime, by empty downtowns, and by an accumulation of costs that make the economics impossible. If this video opened your eyes to what's really happening, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to see this. Drop a comment. What's the late-night food situation like in your city? Are businesses cutting hours? Have you noticed restaurants closing? And check out my other video on why businesses are fleeing California's major cities. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.